It started the first night, just after 2 a.m. The fire had burned down to its orange spine, and the woods had gone unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't come from sleep, but from listening. We were in our tents, 3 of us, zipped into separate pockets of nylon and breath, half-drunk and overly confident in the emptiness around us. And then the footsteps began. Not loud, not fast, but wrong. They didn't land like boots. They didn't drag like bare feet. They tapped, almost delicately, like claws tapping bark, or bone tapping stone. And they circled. Once, slow. Then again, closer. I remember holding my breath, trying to pretend it was a raccoon, a deer, even a person, maybe someone from another site, lost, confused, high. But it wasn't. And I knew that before the third lap around our tent, because by then it had stopped pretending. The footsteps skipped, not like a child, like something that didn't understand how to walk like us. 2 quick steps. A pause. Then 4 rapid taps and silence. I whispered to my brother. He didn't answer. Just shallow breathing from his side of the tent wall, the kind that clings to fear like a second skin. And then the zipper moved, not ours. The tent across the fire ring. Leah's tent. A slow, deliberate, metal tooth rasp. Zipper down. Not fast. Not cautious. Just, sure. I sat up, grabbed the flashlight. I didn't turn it on. I just held it like a weapon. And then she screamed. Not for long, not loud. Just once. Like she didn't want to scream. Like it had taken something from her lungs just before she could finish the sound. We rushed out, nearly tearing through the door flap, and the tent was open. But she wasn't gone. She was inside, sitting upright, eyes open, breathing. But wrong, not fast, not panicked, too slow. Like she was waiting. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We moved Leah into our tent. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared through the mesh ceiling at the stars that no longer looked like they belonged to us. Her lips moved once, barely. I leaned in, thought maybe she was trying to say help, but she wasn't. She said, it walked in backwards. We didn't ask what she meant, because deep down, we already understood. The thing that visited us, the thing that circled our camp like a priest around a grave, it didn't move like us. It didn't want to. We built the fire higher the next night. We made a circle of salt around our tents, told ourselves stories from the old days, like laughter could keep the dark from creeping in again. But it did. Of course it did, because some things don't care about salt, or fire, or prayers whispered too late. Some things come anyway, because they were invited, not by us.by the land.by whatever history we disturbed just by sleeping there. That second night, it didn't circle. It stood right outside our tent, and it breathed, not in and out, just in. Like it was pulling the air from us, like the trees had lungs, and they were learning our names. We tried to leave the next morning, packed everything fast. No breakfast, no cleanup, but the path was gone. Where there'd been a trail, a carved and walked and beaten into the dirt, there was now underbrush, thick and wet, as if it had never been touched. And in its place, footprints, not human, too long, arched in the middle, toes that curled upward, as if they'd been digging into the earth. They went in circles, around the fire pit, around the tents, back and forth from the river and back again. Always around, never away. That's when Leah spoke again. The ground is dreaming of us, she said. Her voice was distant, soft, like the forest was speaking through her. Jonah tried to carry her, but she screamed as soon as he touched her. Not like she was scared, like she was being torn. From something deeper, from something under us. We stayed one more night. Because we had to, because the woods had made it so. That night, we heard the singing, not music, not melody, just rhythm. A sound like wet leaves slapping against each other in time. Like a chant that had no words, only intent. We stayed inside the tent. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe too loud. And then we saw the shadows. They didn't have shapes. They had edges, hard ones, carved into the darkness like teeth into a tree. They danced, not with joy, with knowing. Like they'd waited a long time for us to come back. As if they'd seen us before. And when the fire collapsed into itself, we saw it standing there again, not walking, not pacing, just standing, right outside our tent, arms too long, back arched, head tilted slightly sideways like it was trying to hear thoughts we hadn't said yet. And its feet never touched the ground. It was small enough to miss, just a carved wooden figurine, left on a flat stone beside the fire pit. No larger than a salt shaker, worn smooth from handling. It didn't look sinister. It didn't have teeth or nails or blood. It had smile lines, a tiny etched mouth, hollow eyes, arms folded over its chest like it was praying or waiting. We found it the second morning after a night of beer and burned marshmallows. And at first, we thought it was a joke. We were 7. 3 tents, 2 coolers, 1 busted radio. It was supposed to be a detox from the world. Phones off, no clocks, no distractions. A remote patch of forest near Harlow Ridge, not marked on public maps, only known by locals. We weren't locals. We were tired, burned out. And maybe that's why the forest let us in. It didn't feel wrong at first. It felt ancient, sure. Older than roads. The trees bowed low and thick over the trail, their branches braided like knuckles clasped in prayer. But we were used to that eerie Midwest hush, used to strange creeks and cold soil. We'd all grown up in forgotten towns, where the dead weren't always buried and the living didn't always sleep right. So when Marcy found the figurine, we didn't freak out. Not really. She laughed, held it up, and said, "Guess we've got fans." Carl said it looked like a voodoo doll. Bree said it looked like something you'd find at a thrift shop, sandwiched between old Bibles and expired board games. We passed it around, mocked it, even made it our camp mascot. Someone sat it in the ashes of the fire, facing outward. We didn't ask who put it there. We should have, because that night, the screaming started. It began just after midnight. Not from within the camp, from the trees. High-pitched, human, but warped, like a recording that had been dragged backward through teeth. It wasn't a single voice. It was many, all shrieking in unison, but never overlapping. Layered like a choir, cursed and conducted by something deep under the soil. We froze. Every flashlight clicked on at once, as if our bodies remembered a rule we didn't. We circled the fire, backs to each other, light scanning tree trunks. But there was nothing. No movement. No wind. Just the screaming, and the figurine, now lying on its side in the ash, face down, arms spread wide. We didn't sleep. At dawn. The forest fell silent again, but something had changed. Kyle was the first to say it. The trees moved. He wasn't wrong. The trail we'd hiked in on had vanished. Where there had been an open path to the east, there was now a wall of roots and moss-covered bark. The GPS still showed our coordinates, but the topography didn't match. The air felt thicker. Not foggy, just denser, like walking through breath. The figurine was upright again. No one touched it. None of us said we did. It now faced the center of camp. Its arms were no longer folded. They were raised. Bent at the elbows like it was praising something we hadn't seen yet. That's when the dream started. Marcy woke screaming. Said her hands were full of teeth. Said she'd pulled them from her own mouth one by one and couldn't stop. Her tongue bled even though she hadn't bitten it. Bree said she saw her mother hanging from a tree, except her mother had died in a hospital 5 years ago. Said the branches were whispering her name in her mother's voice. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat there, staring at the figurine. It never blinked, of course, but it didn't need to. On the third day, we tried to destroy it. We didn't call it a ritual, but it felt like one. Kyle threw it against a tree. It bounced. Bree burned it in the fire. The flames turned blue and hissed, then died. Marcy tried to drown it in the river. The water bubbled. When she returned, it was already back at the fire pit. Dry, unburnt, staring at us. That night, the screaming returned, louder, closer. We heard footsteps in the dirt, circling. Laughter that sounded like a child chewing on its own tongue. Branches cracked. Voices moaned phrases none of us understood, but felt. There were no animals. No birds. Even the insects had fled. Everything alive had gone silent, except for us. And whatever listened just beyond the tree line. By morning, the figurine had multiplied. There were now 3. Identical, forming a triangle around the camp, each facing inward. Kyle lost it. Smashed one with a rock. His nose started bleeding instantly. Not a drip. A flood. Like his body was rejecting his own defiance. He collapsed by the fire pit, and when we reached him, he whispered something I'll never forget. There's someone beneath the soil. He died that night, not from blood loss, from emptiness. His body didn't decay, didn't bloat, just hollowed, like something had scooped him out from the inside. We buried him beneath the ashes. The next morning, the figurines were gone. But the fire pit had a fourth stone now, smooth, flat, the size of a grave marker, and beneath it, scratching. It wasn't on the map. That should have been the first sign. A lake with no name, no marked road, no official trailhead, just a word-of-mouth pin drop from someone's cousin who swore it was untouched, unspoiled, unknown. And that last one, it was right. Too right. There are places that stay forgotten because something buried them. And that lake had been buried, not with dirt or time, but with silence. The kind of silence that grows roots in the dark that we went anyway. 5 of us got a weekend to escape. From work, from screens, from grief. We needed it. Taylor had just lost her dad. Mason was 2 months sober and trying to stay distracted. And me? I needed to feel something real again. Something raw. Something that reminded me life still had edges. We packed light, borrowed a canoe, and followed the winding, eroded road until it became forest. Then followed the forest until it became breath. Until the trees pressed too close together, and the air thinned like lungs weren't welcome here. And then, there it was, the lake, still, perfectly still. Not a ripple, not a sound. Not even birds overhead. Just a mirror stretched between mountains, reflecting a sky that looked too wide for the world. The surface didn't move when we stepped near it. Not even when Mason tossed in a stone and waited for the splash. There wasn't one that the stone disappeared, no rings, no noise. Just gone that we set up camp at the edge, close enough to see the water from our tents. It didn't feel dangerous, not yet. Just eerie. Like the trees knew something we didn't. Like they were watching, waiting to see if we'd figure it out in time. That night, the fire burned too low that we used dry wood. Plenty of kindling. But the flames stayed small, flickering like they were afraid of being seen. Taylor went quiet halfway through dinner. Said she kept hearing whispers. We laughed it off. Blamed the wind, though there was no wind. Not even a breeze. I offered her whiskey. She declined. Said it sounded like a child's voice. Not crying. Just repeating the same thing over and over. She wouldn't tell us what it said. The second night, Mason found the boat, a faded green canoe, half sunk in the reeds at the far end of the lake. We hadn't brought one, no mention of it in the pin drop, no footprints leading to or from it, no rope. Just there. Like it had been waiting to be noticed, he called us over. I still remember the look in his eyes, part confusion, part recognition. Like he knew it somehow. We helped drag it onto shore. Inside, beneath a tarp, was a single boot. Child-sized. Still tied. Still wet. Mason asked if we thought it could float, that we told him not to test it. That night, he went alone. Took the boat out onto the water without telling anyone that we woke up to his screaming. But by the time we unzipped our tents and got to the shore, the lake was silent again, still emptied, no boat. No Mason. Just one small ring on the surface that faded too fast. Like it had never been there at all. That we searched the shoreline. For hours. Taylor called the park service, no signal, my phone powered off. It hadn't been dead. It just quit. That we tried to leave. Followed the path back. But it wasn't there. Where there had been trail, there was only moss. Thick. Wet. Too green to be real, Taylor cried. I told her it was fine. That we'd wait until morning. Hike in another direction. Make noise. Get found. But the fire wouldn't light. And the sky had changed. The stars were wrong. Constellations bent sideways like someone had moved them. That I looked up and realized I couldn't remember how long we'd been there. 2 days. 3. Taylor whispered that her boots were wet. She hadn't left the tent. That night, I dreamed of Mason. But not as he was as he had become. That he stood waist deep in the lake. Face pale and stretched too thin. Like his skin had been pulled over someone else's bones. His mouth hung open and water poured out. He said nothing. But behind him, dozens of shapes moved beneath the surface. Children that I could see their eyes, wide and black and watching. And in the distance, the green canoe, floating upside down. Alone. I woke up screaming. Taylor was gone. Her tent, collapsed, but still zipped from the inside. Her footprints, leading to the water, just hers, barefoot, in the fire pit, cold. Like it hadn't burned in days. But the ashes were still fresh, and beside them, in the dirt, were the words scratched by finger. It only takes one name. I didn't speak for the rest of the morning. I didn't cry. I didn't move far from the fire pit. Because something had changed. Something fundamental. The world hadn't shifted. I had. The moment I saw those words in the dirt, "It only takes one name," I knew this wasn't a haunting. It was a feeding. And we'd already started to give it what it wanted. The silence was thicker now. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of listening. The forest had ears. The trees leaned too close, their roots curling upward like fingers through the soil. Every breath I took felt borrowed. Every thought echoed like it was being watched from inside. And the lake was awake. It didn't shimmer anymore. It pulsed, just barely. Like a heartbeat under black ice. I walked the perimeter, not to look for Taylor, not really, but because I couldn't stay still. Something in my bones said movement was survival. I followed the shore until the ground changed. Until the rocks gave way to soft, black mud. Not dirt, mud. Wood even though it hadn't rained. Thick and warm like blood in a shallow grave. And in it, half buried, was a necklace. Taylor's, the one she hadn't taken off since her dad died. I reached down to grab it, but the mud moved, shifted, breathed, and something beneath it grabbed my wrist. Not a hand. A mouth. It didn't bite. It kissed. Cold lips pressing gently against my skin, then gone. I screamed, fell back, crawled until the mud was behind me. My heart didn't stop hammering until I was back at camp. And when I looked down at my wrist, there was no mark, just 3 perfect dots, spaced like a triangle, like teeth that didn't want to pierce, just claimed. I stopped saying names after that. Not mine, not theirs, not even inside my head. Because something was using them, twisting them. The night before, I dreamed of Mason. Last night, Taylor. And both were gone the next morning. What if saying their names gave the lake permission? What if it fed on memory the way it fed on sound, dragging people down not by force, but by recognition? I sat by the cold ashes of the fire and tried to forget my own name. Tried to erase it from the place in my mind where it lived like a root. That's when the voices started, not real ones. Reflections. I heard myself, not from inside, but outside. Like someone was repeating every word I wasn't saying aloud. Not mocking, just practicing. Trying it on. The cadence was wrong, the rhythm. Like a voice learning to crawl, the wind shifted and brought it closer, carrying the whisper of my name not from the forest, but from the water. I turned and saw the lake had risen. Subtly. By inches. But risen. As if it had heard the name I refused to speak, and liked the sound of silence better. That night, I didn't build a fire. I didn't eat. I just sat and stared at the edge of the water until the stars returned. But they weren't my stars. They moved, shifted, formed shapes I didn't recognize. A spiral. A figure with no face. A doorway made of bone. And in the center of the lake, a glow, pale, pulsing, not reflected, emanating. A glow from beneath. Something was coming up, not swimming, rising, like it had been dreaming in the silt for too long, and now it wanted air. I backed away from the shoreline, but the glow followed, not fast, just persistent, like it wasn't moving, the world was. And I realized the trees behind me had changed again. No longer forest, now walls, thick trunks pressed shoulder to shoulder, sealing me in. There was no way out, only forward, only into the lake. I should have run. I should have screamed, but I didn't. I stepped forward. One step, then another, until the water touched my toes and whispered, not a word, not a threat, just music, the sound of every person I had ever loved, calling me home. The water didn't feel like water. It felt like memory, heavy, familiar, too warm, like it already knew me. It soaked through my boots, wrapped around my ankles like roots reclaiming what had once been theirs. And it whispered again, not words, not thoughts, just a sound beneath sound. The way grief hums in the bones long after the crying stops. I didn't want to go deeper, but I did, because the lake wasn't calling me. It was inviting me. And there's a difference. A scream demands. A whisper offers. It was offering me a chance to understand. See what happened to Mason. To Taylor. The people whose names had been left behind like breadcrumbs no one was ever meant to follow. I followed, step by step, until the water reached my waist, until the cold slid under my ribs, until I couldn't feel the line between air and liquid anymore. And that's when I saw them. Just beneath the surface, a face. Then another, then dozens. All facing up. Eyes wide open. Lips parted in a perfect stillness that had nothing to do with death. Because they weren't dead. They were waiting. Their mouths weren't screaming. They were breathing. Not AI or .me.my presence .my thoughts .my memories that I felt them pull. Not like hands, like gravity. And I should have sunk that I should have gone under. But something pushed back. Something behind me. The shore, the trees. The part of the world that still remembered I was alive. And that's when I heard her voice again. Taylor. Clear. Warm. Like she was beside me. She said, "You have to give it something. The lake that IT didn't take without permission that IT made you give. That's why it waited for names, for memories, for stories. That's why it whispered like a lullaby and not a threat. Because the lake never drags that IT seduces that I turned and walked back out. The water didn't fight me, didn't pull harder IT, just receded AS if it had what it needed AS if it knew I'd be back. When I returned to camp, the tents were gone. Not collapsed. Not scattered gone no ashes from the fire, no geared, no footprints. Only my bag. Remained. Open. Empty. Hollowed out like the rest of the world. Inside it, a notebook. Not mine, but filled with my handwriting. Page after page. Memories, names. Every story I'd ever told around a campfire. Every secret. Every regret. Written down like scripture. And on the last page, one sentence. What you bury here becomes real. I didn't sleep, didn't speak that I sat at the edge of the lake, watching it breathe, listening to the voices of the lost hum like a choir under the surface. They weren't crying for help. They were singing. Singing in a language that wasn't spoken. Only felt. That's when I saw Mason again, standing across the water. Not in the water, darn it. He didn't wave, he didn't speak. He just pointed behind me that I turned. And there, where the forest had once been, stood a house, no windows, no door. Just walls made of mirrors. Tall, arched, dirty with age. I stepped toward it without meaning to, because that's what this place does. IT doesn't command. IT nudges. Soft, patient, fatal. Inside the house, there were no reflections. Only shadows, figures I recognized but couldn't name. People I'd forgotten. People I'd erased. They stood in rows, facing away from me, silent, unmoving, until one of them, the smallest, turned. IT was me. Not now. Me at 7 years old, holding a rock I had once thrown at a bird just to see if it would fly. The version of me that learned cruelty too early. The version I tried to forget. He opened his mouth and said my name. I collapsed. The sound wasn't loud. IT was true. And truth, in this place, is heavier than death. When I opened my eyes again, I was back at the lake. The house was gone, but the notebook was in my lap, and the water had risen, closer now, lapping at my boots again. As if it had followed me home. By the fourth morning, time didn't exist, not really. The sun still rose, but it didn't warm. It cast light, not heat, as if the sky had agreed to mimic morning, but not deliver it. I sat by the lake with the notebook in my lap, flipping through pages I didn't remember writing. Every name I'd ever spoken aloud was there. Every person I had ever hurt, even the ones I convinced myself I'd forgotten. The boy I bullied in middle school. My grandmother, whose calls I stopped answering. Even Mason and Taylor, their names repeated like echoes that never quite faded. Some were crossed out, others underlined. But one name stood alone, mine, written in bold strokes, over and over, dozens of times, like someone had been practicing it. Or trying to own it. And at the very bottom of the last page, just beneath my final name, was a new one. I didn't recognize IT. IT wasn't a name in any language I knew. Just jagged marks that made my stomach clench when I looked at them. IT felt like reading something sacred in. A voice that didn't belong to humans. It felt like I'd been signed away. The lake was calm again, quiet, but not peaceful. It felt full, like it had eaten too much, like it was bloated with memory and faces and breath that no longer belonged to lungs. And it wanted one more. Just 1.1 gift freely given. I understood then what the others hadn't. It didn't want bodies. It wanted stories, souls wrapped in memory, because stories are immortal. Name survive bones. If it could claim your name truly, fully, then it could wear you forever, repeat you, rebuild you, replace you. The lake didn't kill Mason. It became him. That was the Mason I saw. That's why he didn't wave. Because he wasn't waving goodbye. He was showing me who I would become next. I stood at the edge, notebook in hand, and I thought of everyone who'd vanished, everyone whose name had been said aloud in this place, everyone who had been remembered too well, too lovingly, too loudly. I took a match from my coat pocket, lit the corner of the notebook, and dropped it. It didn't sizzle. It screamed. The paper didn't curl, it convulsed. Like it was alive, like it knew it was being erased. The fire spread fast. Pages blackened, names burned away, and the lake roared. The surface convulsed. The water split open like a mouth, and from beneath it, the faces began to rise. Mason, Taylor, children I'd never seen before. Eyes hollow, wide, filled with reflection. They stared at me, not begging, not angry, just waiting. And I understood what they needed. Not rescue, not vengeance. Release. I stepped into the lake one last time. Knee deep. Then waist. Holding the final shred of the notebook. One word that hadn't burned. My name. Only mine. I whispered it once. Then tore the page. Dropped it into the water. It didn't sink. It floated. Then caught flame, not from fire, but from memory burning itself out. And the voices stopped. All of them. The lake went still. No ripples. No glow. No breath. Just water again. Just silence. Just the way it had been before we arrived. When I woke up, it was dawn. A real one. Warm. The fire pit was cold, but still their .2 tent stood upright. My bag zipped, and beside it, a green canoe. Tethered. Empty. Waiting. But the footprints that led from it were mine. And only mine. I walked back to the car. The road had returned. The trailhead was visible. Cell service. Wars.no messages.no missed calls.no sign of the others.no police reports.no news articles.no record that 5 people had ever driven into those woods, except for one thing. When I looked into my rearview mirror as I pulled away, I saw someone sitting in the canoe, waving, smiling, and when I blinked, they were gone. That night, I slept in my own bed, safe, warm, but just before sleep took me, I heard it again. Soft. At the base of the stairs. A voice, not mine, trying on my name, repeating it, like a song half remembered from a childhood I never lived. Because once the lake learns your name, it never forgets. And one day, when you're alone, when the lights flicker, when the world tilts ever so slightly off center, it'll whisper it again. And this time, you'll answer.